"You're out of compliance with community standards," she said, sliding the notice across my mailbox like it was a court order. Her voice was sweet on the surface, but sharp underneath. "That vehicle draws the wrong kind of attention. You've got 72 hours to move it, or we escalate." I didn't flinch. Didn't give her the satisfaction she wanted. I just rested a hand on the mirror-polished fender and answered, steady as Sunday morning, "That car's insured for over 600 grand. And every inch of it I built myself." She hesitated, barely half a beat, but it was enough. I knew exactly who I was dealing with. The kind of person who mistakes authority for a crown and believes a clipboard makes her queen. I'm Mason Hale. I own Hale & Sons Restorations out in North Hollow. The Sons is aspirational. My dad passed before we could finish a car together, but I left his name in the business to keep him close. The car in my driveway was a '61 Jaguar E-Type flat-floor welded bonnet, the very one he used to describe like it had its own heartbeat. And when I said I built it, I meant nights with his old cracked socket set, his voice in my head reminding me of torque specs, cracking jokes about British electrics. It wasn't just metal. It was memory. So when my HOA's vice president, Trina Caldwell of Alderey Preserve, told me my Jag clashed with neighborhood harmony, what she really meant was my father's voice didn't match her decor. And you can imagine how well I took that. I left the car right where it was. Garage door open. Chrome polished like therapy all weekend. Neighbors drove by slow, giving me that sideways look of people wishing they had more backbone. Trina circled twice in her silver Audi but never stopped. People like her would rather cut you with paper than face you in person. Then, just after midnight on Monday, Mabel, my old shepherd mix, gave a low growl she only uses for real threats. I looked out the window and saw it, an orange bloom where the hood used to be, glass shattering, smoke rising. Not an accident. No battery, no fuel, no ignition harness, nothing in that car could burn on its own. I stood barefoot on the driveway, smoke in my lungs, and made myself watch. Some losses you owe the dead to witness. The fire crew did their job and called it undetermined, but I knew better. The accelerant bite in the air, the way the flames started on the passenger side like a match to sandpaper. I recognized the signs. By dawn, I'd sent 2 emails, one to my insurer and one to Noel Hart, an old client, Army vet, now senior fire claims investigator with zero tolerance for lies. While I was still sweeping ash off the concrete, the HO blasted a community-wide email. Reminder, fire hazards and compliance. No sympathy, no acknowledgement that my shrubs were still smoldering. Just a neat list of banned displays, pointed straight at me. Then came the next notice. Pictures of my burned Jag, time-stamped, warning I had 48 hours to clear hazardous remains. That told me exactly what Trina's plan was. Bury the mess she made under paperwork and dare me to dig it up. I tried to let it go. My wife Emma's hand on my shoulder, telling me the neighborhood wasn't worth the stress. But grief weighs heavy and anger runs light. And I guess in that moment, I needed something to carry. I needed air, so I walked the loop around Alder Creek that night. Past the regulation hedges, past the flags that didn't meet code but somehow never drew notices. Past 3 basketball hoops abandoned at curbs. Past a pumpkin still rotting behind a shrub in April. That's when it hit me hard as a torque wrench to the knuckle. The rules here aren't rules. They're weapons. And in the wrong hands, weapons get used. The next morning, I went to the HOA office on Cedar Grove. The receptionist slid over a half-page incident appeal form. No spot for evidence. No room for photos. Just a tiny box for me to explain away arson in a few sentences. On my way out, I stopped at the framed list of board members, reading each name like a menu. One stood out. Treasurer Franklin Bell. Quiet type. Always scribbling notes at meetings. The kind of man who knows where every cent lands, because he's the one who signs the checks. The kind who might hate bullies as much as I do, just waiting for someone to say it first. Back home, I pulled up my Nest footage. Smoke, sirens, white haze. Nothing useful. But what stuck in my head wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't. The HOA's Pride and Joy security cam. The one they brag about every holiday party like it's Fort Knox. That camera should have caught everything. So I filed a request. 3 hours later, an email from Trina landed. Unfortunately, the system experienced an outage during the relevant time. Cute. Because I'd rebuilt a 71 Challenger for the regional manager at Secure Span, the vendor who installed those very cameras. And I knew outages don't wipe cloud backups unless somebody tells them to. I called in a favor. Met Colin Reyes, one of their techs, behind the secure span warehouse by the loading dock. "Mason, I can't give you video without a board order," he said, eyes flicking in that way people do when they're choosing between truth and their paycheck. "But I can tell you if something odd happened." 10 minutes later, he handed me a printout that felt like a live fuse in my palm. Failed login 2:05 a.m. Admin sync 2:06. Successful access 2:12 by user T.Caldwell. Then, manual override, segment deleted. I slipped a coffee card into his hand and drove home, heart pounding with that hollow weight you feel when hope hardens into proof. I scanned the logs, backed them up 3 different ways, and called Noelle. "You want a claim or a case?" she asked, voice dry like she already knew. "Both," I told her. "And I want it loud enough she hears it in her sleep." "Give me 48 hours, she said, "and I'll drop a preservation order and a subpoena request so clean they'll think a judge drafted it himself." That would have been enough for most people. But grief doesn't let you sit still. So I drove to a beige office park. A paralegal named Jenny Pike cracked the door just wide enough for me to slip inside. She whispered before the latch clicked, "I'm not part of this." Then handed me a flash drive like it weighed 100 pounds. "Call if you need leverage," she said. I call it theft. That flash drive was a museum of petty power, favors granted for allies, punishments stacked for enemies. Buried between garden memos and holiday budgets was the one that froze my jaw, an email to Tobias D., Trina's husband. Sent 2 nights before the fire. Subject line: the car. "If he won't comply," it read, "the obstacle in his driveway will be handled." Handled. Not reported. Not resolved. Handled. I showed Emma at the kitchen table. She breathed slow, steady, then slid our old velvet ring box across the wood. Inside was the original gear knob from my dad's Jag, the one he'd carved HH into 60 years ago with a lighter and a nail. Holding it steadied me more than any court order could. Later, I met Noelle in a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and toner. She scanned the logs without flinching, tapped the 2:12 a.m. entry with her fingernail. "If this sticks, it's obstruction," she said. Then she slid an envelope into her bag and warned me to stay quiet until she set the trap. I tried, but people like Trina don't back off when they feel the ground shift. They push harder. 3 notices landed in my mailbox the same day. Noise violation, grass too long, garage paint that had already been approved 2 years ago. And tucked in by a mistake, a handwritten reminder to Treasurer Bell. It listed discretionary adjustments she'd signed off on, proof of how she kept in compliant with favors she could just as easily retract. That night, I found Frank Bell by the koi pond during the garden walk, Trina's favorite photo op. I handed him the mis-delivered sheet. His eyes sank, his shoulders dropped, like a man finally setting down a load he'd carried too long. "She keeps receipts on everyone," he said without meeting my gaze. After a pause, he added, "I signed up to balance budgets, not to cover fires." He started to leave, but stopped just long enough to say, almost too soft to hear, "Your dad used to wave to my kid every morning on his way to chemo." I remember who you are. By then, my showroom window carried a new display, a poster-sized print of that access log. Her username, the timestamp, the deletion command. Black on white, a billboard for truth. The HOA called an emergency board meeting for Friday. Noelle rang me. "We're serving the preservation order in the room. Do not take the bait. Let her talk herself into the box." And then Frank came knocking after dark with a manila folder he barely touched. Inside, an invoice from Secure Span for a remote deletion fee never entered into the HOA ledger, signed T. Caldwell, along with a draft motion to censure any board member who shared unapproved documents, which was bureaucrat code for sit down, Frank, and keep your mouth shut. By Friday, the clubhouse was standing room only. People who hadn't shown up to a meeting in 5 years sat like they were in a courtroom, holding their breath for a verdict. Trina strolled in 5 minutes late, dressed in the kind of slate suit she bought for moments exactly like this. She gave me the quick glance you give a wasp you hope stays drowsy, then slammed down a gavel she wasn't even authorized to use and declared the session open. She tossed out words like protocol, rumors, misinformation. And when she moved to censure me by name, Frank stood. His voice was steady in that way quiet men sound when they finally had enough. "Point of order," he said. "Page 14, Section 3. During an active investigation, all punitive actions are stayed. Then he laid the invoice and the access log on the table, and you could feel the air in the room tilt 1 degree, then another. That's when Noel stood from the back. No badge flash, no theatrics. Just jeans, a black tee, and a voice steady enough to carry through any courtroom. "Miss Caldwell," she said, walking to the table, "Capstone Insurance has opened a joint claim and liability investigation. This is your legal notice. Preserve all emails, logs, and financials back to March 1st. Do not delete. Do not alter. Do not issue further fines without third-party approval." She set the envelope down like a car dealer, delivering the final hand. And for the first time since this began, Trina's hand shook. She adjourned without looking my way, slipped out the side door with Tobias trailing her, and by morning her name vanished from the HO website. Vice President, vacant, pending special election. The president resigned 2 days later, citing more time with family. Within a week, the board passed 3 reforms: mandatory third-party audits of surveillance, 2-signature rule for discretionary spending, and guaranteed homeowner access to raw security footage when their property's involved. Someone nicknamed the last one the Hail Clause. I hated it, and I loved it. Noel called to close the loop. The city attorney was reviewing charges for evidence tampering and misuse of HOA funds. My claim? Approved in full, damages included, the kind of payout that covers a roof and the therapy you didn't think you needed. Colin from Secure Span sent a single text, audit complete. User access traced to a home IP. The kind of sentence you can't spin your way out of. I didn't throw a party. I just went to the shop early, turned the radio low, and held the gear knob with my dad's initials. I stood before a bare steel shell on the lift, not the car I lost, but another 62 E-Type with its own story waiting. And I decided I'd build this one slow. Every bolt copper greased. Every grommet line true. A dedication with wheels. Because winning feels good, but keeping a promise to someone gone, that matters more. Here's the thing I keep circling back to: rules aren't the problem. Neighborhoods need guardrails. But power without humility always looks for the match. And if people like Trina can twist bylaws into weapons, the only counterweight is neighbors willing to be inconvenient, to learn the paperwork, to ask for the logs, to call the friend who knows the back end of a camera system, to show up on a Friday night and vote for reforms that stop fireworks from landing in someone else's driveway. And yeah, sometimes it means printing the ugly truth big and hanging it in your window. So, tell me, was I right to push this far, to drag it into the open and let it get messy? Or should I have kept my head down and let insurance quietly mop it up? Where's the line between community standards and personal rights, between privacy and accountability, between a neighbor who cares and a board that punishes? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me what justice looks like on your street. And if you've got your own HOA war story, I want to hear it. Hit subscribe if you want more true homeowner showdowns, because the next one's already idling in the bay.